The Fenian raids were a series of abortive armed incursions formed by the Fenians, an Irish secret society. After the Irish immigrated to the U.S. because of the potato famine and depression, the Americans, British, and Irish took part in raids. The Irish Nationalist Secret Society attempted to conquer Canada and exchange it with Great Britain for Irish independence. The Fenian raids were conducted by about 10,000 men who invaded British Canada, or now known as the more British areas of Canada, like Ontario, British Columbia, and some parts of Quebec. By March 1866, it was obvious to the Canadians that the Fenians were going to invade Canada's land. After being informed about these invasions, 14,000 citizens of Canada enrolled in the duty. In April of that year, the Fenians staged a raid against Campobello Island in New Brunswick. The outcome only destroyed a few buildings, which were later fixed. The Fenians continued to invade Canada. In May 1866, evidence revealed that there was going to be another attack in Canada. The Fenians attacked Canada West and Canada East, or now modern-day Quebec. 20,000 Canadians volunteered under the guidance of the Royal Navy. The Canadians patrolled the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River. Happily for Canada, the Fenians' plans fell apart because of the very little men that took part in the raid. How have our lives changed since 1866? Our rights and privileges have changed. Women have rights now and are currently allowed to vote. Canada has become a safer country and is more protected. Lifestyle has changed, our clothes have changed, and cars are different. Why did the Fenians want Irish independence? Ireland was part of another union and wanted to leave. In 1866, Ireland was part of a union with Scotland, England, and Wales. Currently, Northern Ireland is still part of Great Britain. How did the Fenian raids affect the Confederation? Anyone who lived on the border of Canada was threatened by the raids. Areas that were colonized by the British in Canada were invaded by the Fenians. The Confederation kept Canada safe from being attacked by the Fenians. What did Canada do to protect itself from the Fenian raids? Canada enforced the borders with military patrols. Military training for men took place in Canada East and Canada West. Canada imprisoned any spy who was caught, including John O'Neill, who was the leader of the Fenian raids. What relationships between countries changed from these events? The Americans and British gave compensations to John A. Macdonald after the destruction of the Fenian raids. After John A. Macdonald created the railroad and canal construction, and also helped with the Washington Treaty, the British loaned more money. Relationships that the Canadians had with the British and Americans improved through the course of the raids. What were the rights and privileges of the Canadians, and how were those affected when the Fenians invaded Canada? Did the Fenians invade Canada to get their own rights? In 1862, the Fenians planned to invade Canada. By 1866, Canada was being invaded, and Canadians started to notice what was happening. At that time, men in Canada were allowed to vote. Women in Canada stayed home with their children and took care of the house. Men were eligible to vote if they owned a certain amount of property or land, paid their taxes, and had a satisfactory amount of money. The law prohibited specific religions or ethnic groups from voting. Each electoral district usually only had one polling station. All votes had to be cast orally and could not be handwritten. Election dates differed from one riding to another. Polling stations were closed if an hour had passed without any votes being cast. Canada had very strict rules about voting, but it was quite easy to fake a vote. Since votes were done orally, the voters could have blackmailed the vote collectors to make the votes invalid. To win a vote, a Canadian could simply hire a group of people to vote for them. Many violent acts took place because of those ludicrous events. The Fenians invaded Canada because they wanted Ireland to become an independent country. The laws in Ireland were different from the laws and privileges in Canada. The Fenians wanted to have their own rights and not be under the British rule. That's why the Fenians held Canada hostage to ransom the land. In 1866, while voting, voters were provided with free alcohol, which caused many riots and multiple deaths. There was one death in St. John, New Brunswick, around the time the Fenians raided. During 1866, Vancouver Island joined British Columbia. At their next election, there were no voting restrictions except in New Westminster, where Indigenous and Chinese people could not vote. The island voting only allowed landowners who were British subjects and had passed the 3-month residency test. Robert E. Lee was an Irish-American war veteran forced to immigrate to the U.S. with other Irish-American war veterans. They were excited to ransom Canada's land for Irish independence. A Michigan senator wanted to send a 200,000-man army to seize Canada to apparently weld the North and South together by friendship. The Fenian Brotherhood was founded in New York City in 1858. The Fenians told the President Andrew Johnson of their plans, and he turned a blind eye on it. Some Irish thought that the British were trying to terminate them with the potato famine. The Fenians wanted independence because they were afraid. The Fenian Brotherhood had their own Capitol building with a president. They started raising money for war bonds in denominations of $10 and $500. The Fenians began to invade Canada, but failed. They invaded Canada 5 times. The Battle of Ridgeway commenced. The Battle of Ridgeway took place in Fort Erie, Canada, when the Fenians invaded. All of these battles that the Fenians performed made the Canadians scared and worried. The Canadians wanted the Confederation to happen to keep Canada safe. The Confederation. Most provinces had already approved the Confederation, but French Canada East and English Canada West had political fighting about the provincial legislature. From 1861 to 1864, there were no less than 4 governments in Canada. Each government had failed to provide long-term stability, and growing cultural tension had separated the province down party and religious lines. The native North Americans in eastern and western Canada were left out of all of the discussions about the Confederation. In 1867, the federal government took responsibilities over Indigenous affairs from those colonies. The Dominion of Canada purchased Rupert's Land in 1870, extending their influence over the Indigenous peoples that lived in that region. From 1871 to 1921, the federal government signed a series of 11 treaties, also known as the Numbered Treaties, with the Indigenous peoples. They were promised money, certain rights to land, and concessions. Most promises were unfulfilled by the Canadians. To answer the big idea, many Canadians enjoyed the rights and privileges that they obtained after the Confederation. The British regions of Canada felt safer because of it. The Fenian raids made all of the provinces of Canada realize that they needed to unite in order to keep the country safe from being attacked or invaded again. Although, the Indigenous peoples of Canada were not included in the Confederation at all, meaning that they were not assured of all of the safety, health, and rights and privileges of others. Even though the majority of areas in Canada felt safer than before, the Indigenous peoples of Canada were unsure of what to do. In conclusion, the Indigenous peoples of Canada did not enjoy the same rights and privileges of other parts of Canada that took part in the Confederation.